In this video, we're going to implement the getAddresses method for our address service implementation. And this method will need to return a list of objects, and each object in that list will be of data type address DTO. So let me copy and paste the return value. So the return value is going to be list of objects. I'm simply defining it and then returning an empty list. So let me import array list. Now, this function accepts user ID as a method argument, and we will need to return a list of addresses that belong to that user. So we will somehow need to query the user ID details first. So I'll paste a couple of lines of code, and what they do is we will need to use user repository, which we need to auto-wire, and I'll do it right now. And now let's import auto-wired. And let's import user repository. Okay, now when we have user repository, we can use its find by user ID method to fetch user details by public user ID, and the return value will be user entity. So let me import that as well. So now when we have user details, we can actually use user entity to get list of addresses right away. So if I use this object, I can get list of addresses right away. But I would like to show you a method where we actually create addresses repository and query list of addresses from a database. So to do that, we will need to create another repository, which is going to be address repository. And let's auto-wire it. We don't have this class yet, but we will just define it and then go and create it. So I'll copy these two lines, paste them, and now this is going to be address repository, and I will also rename this to address repository. And now when I have the address repository object, I can use it to query addresses that belong to that user ID. So let me paste the line of code here, remove space here. So we will use address repository to find all by user details, and we will give it user entity object. And Spring Data GPA will query the addresses table using user details that we give it. So let me import address entity. And once we have list of addresses, we can then add each address to the return value object that we have here, converting each one of them to address DTO. So I'll paste a couple of more lines here, which is we will use for loop, and for each object inside of addresses, we will add that object to a return value, but we will map the data from address entity into a new object of address DTO data type. And now we need model mapper. So I will bring model mapper and I will actually paste it somewhere here above, like this. So now let's import it. And our function is almost ready. All we need to do is we need to create the address repository interface. And when creating that interface, I will also walk you through the details of why I named this method as find all by user details. So let's continue to the next video.